This is the most exciting part of the year for myself. I know for Dr. Garcia. What do I smell? I smell pigskin. I know that sounds a little nasty, but it's football season 2023. We're about to kick off. I'm Will Sanchez. This is Sports.Talk. Check us out at sports.talk.com. You can find our shows, transcripts. You can find our Gmail. Please send us your request for show topics. All sports, all orthopedics, all the time. And we once again have our favorite orthopedic surgeon and sports medicine specialist, Dr. Grant Garcia. Dr. Garcia, it's football season. Welcome to the show. It's so good to talk with you once again.
Yeah, it's good to be back. We had a little summer hiatus, but I am extremely excited. We got the first Giants game coming up. Got a brand new looking team, faster team, and so far healthy team. So this is really exciting. And I'm excited about the show today because it's football season and everyone loves to talk about football.
Oh, yeah. Once again, man, it's football season. For those fans that haven't listened to our previous shows, I'm from New York, now in Seattle. We have Dr. Garcia here in Seattle. We're both Giants fans, so that is the common thread. This is how we meet and conclude in the middle of this beautiful relationship, friendship, partnership. It's the New York Giants that have tied us all together, so that's where our allegiance lies. How excited are you for this Giants season after a 10-8-1 season last year? Coach Brian Daboll, Coach of the Year, led the Giants to the playoffs. They demolished Minnesota and finally get knocked out by the Eagles. How excited are you for this upcoming season as a Giants fan?
I'm extremely excited. I mean, we have a lot of speed. I was just reading recently it's one of the fastest teams as opposed to one of the slowest teams, which is just, speed kills now in the NFL. Darren Waller, what can I say? I'm really excited about watching him play. I hope he stays healthy. And I think that it's going to be good for Dan Jones to no longer have the criticism of getting a new contract, et cetera, and he can just play his heart out and feeling more comfortable with Daboll. So, I mean, there's a lot to look forward to. The only thing I'm worried about is, the Giants worked best last year at being an underdog, and now they're no longer a secret. So, how is that going to affect them? I don't want them to turn into a Cowboys, as you know, where lots of high expectations, it doesn't perform.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the expectations. I'm worried about the Philadelphia Eagles and the rest of the division and the NFC conference. But as we get ready to kick off the 2023 season, it's a perfect segue to talk about the kickoff rule change on concussions, right? So there's a paper there that you had sent to me. It's the effect of the 2018 NCAA kickoff rule change on concussion rates in college football. And in fact, the investigation performed was at the University of Washington here in Seattle, Washington. Let's talk about that. When you read the paper, what was your findings and what was really interesting about this paper that you can share with the audience?
Well, I think what's interesting is, again, we're shifting now to college versus NFL. But, you always keep hearing, and I think sometimes you have people complain about football and they're saying they change the rules to protect the players, right? Yeah. And that's always the goal. Change the rules, protect the players. We don't want to see concussions. We don't want to see players having traumatic brain injuries or whatever else. If we talked about Dr. David Smith from the Q Collar telling us it's not concussions, we're talking about looking for more traumatic injuries in terms of the definition. But basically, by changing this college rule, they try to change it so you no longer have kickoffs. You do fair catches and touchbacks and trading when you start on this. So it's automatic, no longer kickoffs or a significant decrease in that. And the thought process is by having this high impact, because this is the most high impact of all you're doing, right? You have full speed, almost the entire field coming at another player from the other side. You don't get to wind up like that any other option other than, a kickoff or a punt return or something else. So what they found was the thought process is going to reduce concussions by fixing the rule. And what's interesting is it made no difference. And the overall amount of concussions was stable. The only thing they always want to, question with these papers is how were they determining that? Was it a test? As we know, the tests are not always great. But nonetheless, it's interesting to bring up because we always think about rule changes. We're talking about another rule change or another change in the NFL and whether that led to improvements or decreased injury rates. But we keep talking about these interventions that are going on, and we're saying, hey, I hope this is going to make it better. I hope this is going to be better for the players. Yeah. And right now we're not seeing that. So, I think people are worried, are they going to start getting rid of touchbacks or getting rid of kickoffs for the NFL? And at this point, it doesn't show to be a big difference. And so maybe they're going to keep it the same. But it's interesting to have that data, because I think a lot of people don't understand that, don't think that. They're thinking, okay, a lot of these rule changes, clearly there's data to show it's effective. In this case, it wasn't.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and this is a very debatable topic, right? Because there's an aspect of it that I'm not sure if the paper concludes is the amount of kickoffs that are not being returned. So if you had 1,000 kickoffs, and now because you have a touchback rule that automatically puts the ball at the 25 and they decide not to run it back, so instead of 1,000 returns, you only have 700 returns, and the concussion number or the percentages are still the same, are we still getting a decrease because we have less returns? So I think that's where it becomes an interesting conversation, because the amount of plays that are being used compared to the amount of plays that are no longer being played. So it's an interesting dynamic in how that plays a part with these conversations.
Will, are you sure you're not an MD? You have so much knowledge of these papers. I love it.
It's so funny.
Anyhow, well, it's great to know. We talk about sports all the time, but we never talk about data.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting to show this. I don't want to bog the audience down with the data, but that the fact that people know, like, this is where NFL and us as team physicians, we see this stuff. This is important to us, right? When you're coming up with plays or working with the NFL Players Association, or there were definitely neurologists and neurosurgeons and stuff probably involved in the rule change.
Yeah. And
so they want to show, is this worth it, right? Because it's changing things. I mean, the excitement decreases when you have touchbacks. Right? Is there going to be a run back today? Is there going to be a touchdown? And so is it worth it? And maybe it's not. Who knows? We still have more things to do. But your percentage information, what you brought up is really, really an important point. And again, it's always good to kind of criticize the paper and look at it in detail.
Yeah.
But I thought the audience would like to at least know that. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's concerning also because the numbers can be swayed different ways, right? And then do we take into consideration, and we've discussed this, right? We talk about the, in the most lovingly way that we can say it, the freak athlete, right? And we'll probably touch upon some of these incredible athletes, these specimens throughout this show, especially when it comes to recovery. But then we talk about the size and the speed. I remember the joke was, well, the smaller guy was the fast guy, the bigger guy was just the bulkier guy. But now you've got guys that are 230, 240 pounds running a 4.5 or 4.6, and you put them on a kickoff line and they're running down, flying at you. Those are also considerations, thinking about how big these players are getting as the faster that they get, and these fields are still staying the same, right? CFL, right? The field's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit different. So there's so much that goes into it. And like I said, we can go on and on with this. So, for the purpose of the show, we'll kind of move on. But this is really just kind of tidbits and things for people to think about, when we start to see some of these data.
Totally agree.
We talk about concussions, right? And this is the way we kind of kicked off this show with the kickoff rule and the change on concussion rates for college football. But one of the players that was most recognizable for concussions, and there were many concussions last year, but normally the quarterback gets the most attention, right? And for Tua Tagovailoa, the Miami quarterback, the spotlight couldn't have been brighter. He suffered numerous concussions last year, including one that was as serious as can be when he played the Cincinnati Bengals and got flung to the ground, and his head hit the ground and bounced off the ground and laid there pretty much motionless with his hands in that cramped position. First off, before I move on with my question, can you once again say what was happening to that player when his extremities were tightening up that way?
Well, it was, and by the way, guys, look at Sports Doc Talk podcast. We had a sort of full section on that, so it'll be good if the audience is interested in refreshing the entire episode. And that can be found on all of our different podcast areas. But nonetheless, it's called fencing, and it was likely from a second hit. So he had, again, I don't know how the testing was done then, but there was a lot of staff changes after that. But basically not probably fully recovered from the first concussion, got the second concussion, essentially a second hit syndrome, which is not good. And this caused a severe reaction that you see in traumatic brain injuries, where you can have this sort of position. It's actually kind of an innate neonatal or sort of infant response that people have when they fall. They kind of do this whole thing where they lift their arms up, and that's exactly what he had, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So not ideal. So, I mean, it's really important with a guy like this that he's healthy. Obviously, with ESPN recently showing them making it potentially to the finals or the championships, it's important that we have him at top condition. So.
Yeah, and it's going to, as you said, be impactful for the team, for the league, because I think as a fan, I'm pretty sure as an owner, as a coach, as a player, and, the league itself, they have to be really concerned that Tua doesn't get, hit and have something like that happen to him again, because not only, most importantly, it could be so detrimental to the player and what his long-term outcome is, but people are already scared about what happens in the NFL and what can possibly happen. It is something that I'm pretty sure the league have already discussed with the Miami Dolphins. I am just guessing here, but I'm pretty sure that was the case, that they would have reached out and said something. So there's a lot of concern. And one of the things that they said he's doing is Brazilian jiu-jitsu training to learn how to fall. I'm not sure how that helps when a 300-pound man is flinging you, but, we'll see how that all works out. But, you mentioned at the top of the show, Dr. David Smith, and his biomedical engineering and design the Q collar, which is supposed to mitigate the absorption of sloshing energy by the soft tissue of the brain. And he described so eloquently the inspiration of looking at a woodpecker and how the tongue wraps around the cranium and protects the brain. And that's where kind of that thought process, the beginning of that thought process was for the Q collar. Why aren't players, and I know, there's still discussions about the Q collar, even though it's already FDA approved, why are players maybe hesitant to use something like the Q collar, or is it something just uncomfortableness or just lack of information or just going based on what maybe medical doctors are telling them?
So I think, there's always hesitancy with new tech for lots of people.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting the point you brought up. So yeah, it's probably the device of medical physicians who say, hey, I don't read the data on this. I've never heard of something that can be prevented, because we know about how this works. There was just a post about a helmet that reduces concussion rate by 25% in the NFL. And there were a number of comments, even on LinkedIn, people saying that's not true. That helmets have not shown that, just like Dr. David Smith said. And so, you got to be careful that people are always judging, like, how good is this, right? Because this is if you find the holy grail to reduce concussions, I mean, you're not to work ever again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, we got to be careful with the right thing. It's always finding this like huge area that we're looking for, this huge need. And so him being hesitant to use it makes perfect sense. It also seems almost too simple to work, but we've heard Dr. David Smith, and we've seen, since we've been working with him, we've seen a lot more information from professional athletes that are using it. I would actually say the flip side, that professional athletes tend to be more likely to use the new tech. This situation is different.
Okay. Because
they're always looking for catch the edge, right? Like, I don't consider myself a professional athlete, but I try to keep myself on the edge in terms of trying new technology, innovation, et cetera. And I'm more willing to try some new things based off the sort of patient population I have and what I'm looking for in the Seattle area. And these athletes, they're always looking to find an edge. How can they be a little better? How can they up their game? And they're lucky enough in their situation to have unlimited funds and to have the NFL, their teams backing them. I mean, you see there's all this new biotech, and we can jump into one topic I know you want to talk about, but there's always new tech. They're always trying new things. I mean, it's interesting because most of these companies use the NFL and professional teams as a marketing tool, right? So if they get into the NFL or they get into Sounders locker room, they say, hey, listen, the Sounders use them. But it's funny because it's actually easier to get into professional teams than it is to get into like a regular doctor's office, because the professional teams are like, hey, we'd love to use this. This is brand new. It's not going to hurt our players. It's a peptide evaluator or a blood tester or a massage gun or something really kind of minute. And so they're always willing to try it because they're looking for the edge. I mean, we're always trying to beat the next person in the NFL, and it's a huge multi-million, probably billion-dollar industry. And so if you can find a way to give your players a day faster or 10 days faster, it makes a big difference. And so you'll see, like, when you go in the locker rooms, they have tech all over the place, and they're always trying something new. They're trying these we talked about this, the copper or the bands for the players to know if they're overthrowing. We talked about the tech on these players wear all the time. But so it's interesting that there is certain hesitancy with some things. But again, the other concern is constraint, right? Like, is the cue collar going to constrain him that he can't focus, even though it's a very light amount of pressure? And so you don't see a lot of players with braces or other things to protect their body part as easily, because if it does slow them down, then they lose speed, right? So you want tech, but you don't want to be lost. The tech should only improve you. And if it slows you down at all, they're not going to use it, right? Because they don't want to get cut, or they don't want to get injured, or they don't want to get taken off the field. The NFL is very competitive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And for the people that are listening, there are numerous NFL players using this Q collar right now. I know right off the top of my head, starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys, Pollard, he's always using the Q collar. He's using it for protection. And some of the things that Dr. Garcia just mentioned, so I just want to elaborate on that. It's a pressure it goes on the back of the neck. It causes a slight increase of blood volume in the head, and it helps reduce the brain's movement when there's impact. So the extra infusion of blood creates kind of, using, Dr. Smith's words, an airbag effect that restrains the ability to move inside the cranial fluid. And that's where the thought of the woodpecker or the ram becomes that inspiration, because when let's say if you were to take an x-ray, you would see this protection that's happening around their brain to reduce the movement. And maybe if you've seen the movie Concussion or something like that, you see there's a part in the movie where you see that the brain is shifting back and forth and rattling inside the cranium, which is causing this concussion. I don't know if I described that as well. Dr. Garcia, please help out if I didn't do it.
I told you need to get your MD. You're an expert.
So just to give everyone an idea what this sloshing of the soft tissue of the brain and what this Q collar is. So it's just, once again, we just want to bring stuff up. Also ties into some of our other shows. In fact, that show was on June 27th. So it is an incredible show with Dr. Smith talking about the Q collar and the biomedical engineering that kind of went into all of this and is part of our tech and football kickoff. So Dr. Garcia got jokes. He's taking a shot at me a little bit earlier, talking about getting into this biotech and what I really want to talk about. So just to give everyone some insight, I'm reading this article, and it's on the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? So I'm like, all right, cool. And they got this new biotech, and it's in the urinals. And I'm like, I got to read this, right? So I send a picture to Dr. Garcia, and I said, hey, they have sensors in the urinals. And when the players use the urinals, the sensors will turn either green, yellow, or red based on the player's hydration levels. And I was like, this is really cool. This is biotech. I don't know. Dr. Garcia was like, okay, we're talking about urinals. So I said, I'm going to bring it up for the show if we get to this biotech. So listen, even though it's hysterical, but it tells the fact that it can tell the player how well you're staying hydrated. There has to be some benefit to that, right?
Listen, I think that the thing is, you've seen, on Instagram, they have the glucose monitors, and it's all about knowing your body. And we've talked about this extensively on the show. In our last episode, you can look back on, what athletes do to get the edge or get better, and the tech they're using. We have the smartwatches, tells us when to sleep, tells us our blood pressure, tells us EKG, tells us heart rate. Then you have, this thing that tells you whether you're hydrated or not. You have people telling your glucose levels. We just want to know everything about our bodies so we can be more in tune. Am I feeling crummy because I'm tired? Am I feeling crummy because my blood sugar is low? Am I feeling crummy because I'm dehydrated? Is my urinal hydration system showing green, yellow, or red? I think it's important for us to understand that all this tech is important, and it's just another way for them to be aware of it, right? These guys, they're super athletes. A lot of times they're not even thinking about their athleticism. They're not thinking about hydrating the body. I mean, you've seen all the movies and shows where they go out to dinner, and I've seen them back in, working in the locker rooms with these professional athletes. They have huge meals. They're not talking about very healthy food they're eating. They're not really watching some of the things they're doing because they're just these super athletes constantly exercising, working out all the time. But there are certain ones that take their health really seriously, and I think this is this important point that they're saying. Listen, I mean, Jacksonville is not cold right now.
No,
so it's important to figure out a way to stay hydrated.
It is super hot in Florida.
We've seen football players that have gotten really injured over the last bit. So while I can laugh all I want at your urinal sensor post you sent to me, or text you sent to me, it is important, and especially for Jacksonville. I don't know if the Seattle Seahawks right now are worried about hydration when it's like 64 degrees outside, but in Jacksonville, I could see the reason for it.
And listen, if they're one of these teams that there's a lot of expectations. They expect them to get to the playoffs and, possibly win the South and go kind of far away, far into the playoffs. So they want to make sure that if they have any playoff games in Jacksonville, that everyone's nice and hydrated. So these sensors, they might get a Super Bowl trophy at the end. They'll put like a little star next to the urinal. So who knows where this is all going to go. So I think we've gone awry, but listen, we hope that you get some information on it, because the reality is if you listen to our shows, Dr. Garcia is always talking about tech, right? This is, he loves it. Lovingly I say he's a nerd about it, right? And it's great for us, the patients, because he's always staying on top of technology and innovation. And this is, even though it's a little bit of a funny topic, but it just shows that the biotech is such a important part of everything that we do, whether you're a doctor or you're a patient or you're an athlete. So having these biotechs be a part of our lives is so important. And to see where it may go, and I'm kind of teasing a future show as we talk about future tech, as we see where we're eventually going to go, it should be really exciting to everyone.
I couldn't agree more. I don't want to change your topic, but I definitely think, you guys are going to see in the up and coming months, we've got a lot of good shows planned for you. And I think one of them will be sort of, what are the new cutting innovations? Last year's old news. Let's figure out the new year. What are we doing? How did we do last year? How was it stuff I talked to you about from the new innovative procedures, or how is it new at the NFL? There's been rule changes even in the NFL, or things that have changed in the NFL. Like, how did that affect them? We talked about recently on Major League Baseball with the change in the pitch timing. We don't know anything yet about how it's going to cause injury, but I know we talked on the episode a few years ago with our old podcast that's been molded now into this new one, the game numbers. And I remember it was a while ago that we brought it up.
Yeah.
And how does the expansion of the NFL game time increase injury rates? And we said there's no way it doesn't increase injuries. But I sent you that recent paper. I don't know if you want to tell everyone about kind of what you saw. I don't mean to segue, but it's actually super interesting topic, because I know that was a huge discussion in the NFL whether we should add it. We know why the NFL owners want to do it. There's a lot of money involved in adding another game in the NFL, right?
Yeah.
But for the players, are they going to get injured? Because we don't want that.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect segue, because that's where I was leading, because the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to play in London twice this year. And for your Seattle Seahawks fans, by the way, you guys lead the league in total mileage for this upcoming season. Mm-hmm. And I believe you led the league last year. This upcoming season, they will travel almost 32,000 miles over 36 time zones in one NFL season. By far and away the most. San Francisco 49ers are next on that. So this segues right into this paper that you're talking about, is the association of injury rates among players in the NFL with playoff qualification, travel distance, the timing of the game, and the addition of another game. So, Dr. Garcia, talk a little bit more about the findings that they had, this investigation that was performed at Northwestern University.
So it's really interesting. So basically and again, a lot of these articles, they use like NFL player data, or there's a lot of Major League Baseball, because there's a lot of good player data out there that I've done actually my own papers on using the Major League Baseball database. So this one's really interesting. So basically it looked at 5 NFL seasons, 2017 to 2018, and then through 2021, 2022. Yeah. And when they expanded from the 16 game to 17 game schedule, they looked at whether or not there were more injuries during that time. Mm-hmm. And then they also looked at whether or not they're more likely to make the playoffs and all those other things, injury rates based off distance. And what's really interesting, and again, this is one paper, but they're looking at a lot of accumulative data. And again, you can only look at so many injuries, right? You're looking at basically news. Like if someone tweaks their toe and it's not listed as an injury report, you're not going to ever see that in the NFL data. So it's just something for people to understand. But What's interesting is they found no difference in the injury rate or the number of injuries by adding another game, which I find kind of fascinating. And it's kind of hard to wrap my brain around that. But it's interesting for people saying for kind of argument for the players association, or not players association, the owners, that this new increase did not increase rates. It gave the players potentially more options to work for something or get to the playoffs, and also to showcase their talents. And hopefully there was some bump in income as a result of it for the players. Yeah. But, it sounds like this was still a good thing. Everyone loves more NFL. If I have to, I'd love to see the Giants play an extra regular season game, so I'm not complaining about it. Yeah. But it's important to see that. But what's interesting, this is actually this makes the most sense, is that the teams that were the least likely to qualify for the playoffs had the highest injury rate and the highest amount of players on injured reserve, which makes perfect sense, right? Like, we didn't know, when your team starts getting decimated with injuries, your team's success drops significantly. But this is actually documented now, and this paper is helpful for that. So I don't know if you had anything else to take away from that, but I thought that was really interesting. I know our listeners are going to love that because they don't have access to these papers that I'm sending you. Yeah. So it's nice that we're able to get that information out to the public.
No, I think it was a great paper, and just kind of reiterate, the purpose of the paper was to determine whether they're higher cumulative travel distances or, overseas play. Like when I mentioned, Jacksonville going to play at London twice. In fact, I think they're going to stay there both weeks. I think they're going to do back-to-back, early season bye week, right? For me as a fan, that always stood out. It's like, oh man, the bye week this week is week 4. And then they have, 13 more games to play without a bye week. So as a fan, you're concerned for your team. Like, they're getting that bye week early. They add an extra game. I've always thought that they should add a second bye week. But, this paper is now saying that it's not, it's not making much of a difference, right? Because the conclusion over the 5 NFL seasons with the distance, the play, the bye week timing, the added, was not associated with increased injury rates in NFL players. And so it'll be interesting to see. I would love to see this paper 5 years from now, right? And to see if that stays consistent. Because there will be so many other variables, once again, like kind of we mentioned, right? The size, the speed, the biotech, right? From 2017.
Well, and more international games.
More international games. But it's going to happen, right? And how do they handle that? How do they talk to the doctors? Maybe that's a conversation that you can, help with, when they talk about travel, and especially as, we decide to play more games overseas, do they consult with the doctors, or they just consult with, the bank stub here saying, hey, we just made extra money, when it comes to, hey, this is the best way to take care of our athletes. If we're going to go overseas, this is the way we should do it. I know people like Richard C. Oh my God. What's this guy? Anyway, the player from Thursday Night Football complained about Thursday Night Football, saying, about the injuries, going up on Thursday Night Football, shorter weeks. What is all of that data? So I think there's still some added data that needs to be inputted into, some of these papers.
And again, we don't usually drop papers on our show, but these were 2 super interesting topics that I thought people would like to say. And this one, especially when I sent it to you, and, I immediately thought of making sure that the audience heard this. And again, remember, most people listening to the show, they're not like Will Sanchez that has an MD from his podcast, but understanding the epidemiology and understanding how these papers are done, you got to take it as a grain of salt, right? Like, this is important. This information is interesting. It's a topic, and if anything, it's great for it's great for party conversation. I mean, people talk about the NFL all the time and be like, hey, that extra game, did that cause more injuries? Well, no, I heard about this situation where it didn't. But what's, I think, more important about it is it just gives some more food for thought and saying, okay, maybe our indications or maybe our concerns about this were not perfect or not correct. Yeah. Or how can we make this topic better or more how can we look more into this and find ways to really think about this better, because it doesn't really make sense, right? Shouldn't there be more injuries? So maybe there's something we're missing. Yeah. If something doesn't make sense, you also want to question it.
Well, 100%, which you should always do, right? And by the way, that was Richard Sherman that was drawing a blank on. I was like, I could see his face, and I can't say his name. And I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, it's Richard Sherman. Because obviously he's talked about it. And it's funny, he complained about Thursday Night Football, but now he works for Thursday Night Football. But I digress. Let's kind of move on. Let's talk about some key injuries for some players. Let's make some predictions, sure to go wrong, as we get ready to wrap up our 2023 NFL kickoff season. if you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, one of the most exciting quarterbacks in the league, arguably the top 2, top 3 quarterbacks, in NFL, Joe Burrow has his calf injury. Obviously, the show is before week 1 commences this weekend. What are your concerns for an injury, that calf injury for Joe Burrow? Do you have any concerns? Has there been enough time, or are there any concerns starting week 1 and hopefully playing the entire season? So that's 18 weeks of football after this injury.
I think you've heard this before, but this is one of my least favorite injuries to deal with. These are so nagging. I think Aaron Rodgers had this a while ago. There's been a couple other players with it, but these calf injuries, they come with 2 muscles, the soleus and the gastrix muscles. And when you get these tears, usually it's a tear of the muscle, not an Achilles tear. That's a different animal.
Yeah.
And I know we've heard of players that had the calf injuries and then got Achilles injuries. I don't think that's what he's going to turn into, but they can nag and they can come back. And I've had plenty of, athletes, non-athletes come back with these and, they're better for 6 weeks and all of a sudden they re-injure it again. Now you can sure as heck know he's done everything possible to get ready for week 1. And he's doing PRP, he's doing other stem cell options. He's probably doing anything else and things I haven't even heard about yet to get him back because he's very important for the team. But watch out, I do worry, is he going to get it re-injured? And so, it's just a stressful injury to deal with because it's just, you really can't fix it, right? You just got to let it time be and you got to give it treatment. And so that's hard, especially for an orthopedic surgeon when you're trying to get an athlete back faster.
Is there any benefit for them saying, the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks of the NFL season, we're just going to rest you? Or is this just too hard to answer because you really don't know the severity of that calf injury for Joe Burrow?
You know what? Say that to Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, again, it was a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But, this is the NFL. You had all this time to rest up, and you lose 2 or 3 games at the beginning, and you're iced. It's really hard to come back. We've seen the statistics. If you're 0-3, your playoff chances drop significantly.
Especially in the AFC this year.
Correct,
yes.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And then hopefully Joe Burrow will stay healthy. Hopefully, maybe he's not taking off running, as he's done before and kind of says, hey, I can only push it, which I doubt because when you get out there, you're such a competitor, you're still going to do it. And then the last thing that we want to see is and you kind of alluded to it, was kind of like the Kevin Durant injury where he had a calf injury. And then obviously in the playoffs, we saw that pop and that was the Achilles. Well, on that happy note, we'll move on because there's just no way to do it. And as a football fan, you just kind of want to see everybody out there. He's one of those exciting players that you love to see play week in and week out. So hopefully that calf injury has healed up nicely. Staying in the leg, Cooper Kupp, wide receiver for the Rams, has had a nagging hamstring injury. Apparently, he flew to Minnesota to talk to a specialist. Who knows? Maybe, do you know that specialist in Minnesota? What are the concerns when you have a wide receiver like Cooper Kupp that's had some injuries in the past and at a speed position when you're having a hamstring injury? What are the varieties of injuries that are most concerning, least concerning to most concerning?
Well, you touched on my 2 least favorite injuries now. I remember 2. So these hamstring muscle injuries are a pain in the butt. I mean, you've seen them. I think when Odell Beckham Jr. first started with the Giants, he had this injury, and it was just waiting for him to give his debut. And these are, again, the calf injury is a muscle injury. This is a muscle injury usually. And what it is you get a little muscle tear. You want it to heal as quickly as possible. It doesn't heal as fast as you want. Then you re-injure it. So he's probably going to a specialist. I don't know who he's going to over there in Minnesota, but nonetheless, probably going to one of the Vikings team physicians up there. Those guys are really good. But regardless, he's probably considering treatment options, maybe even considering surgery, but probably not. I would imagine he wouldn't want to do it, but he's also probably getting different opinions to see whether fixing this is going to get him back if they don't think he can get back on his own. So I'm sure he's talking to a bunch of people. When you're flying out to see a specialist, there is definitely a thought of surgery on the plate, in my opinion.
So that's the red flag. When you see, hey, he flew out to see a specialist, that's one of the things that cross your mind saying, okay, this is maybe a little bit more severe there than, just a slight pull, and there might be surgery, that's on the board because of the severity of this injury.
And also, again, the NFL players are different. Usually a normal person wouldn't go fly out if it was a non-operative treatment. Like if they're like, oh, I want to, I'm like telling you, this can be treated with 3 weeks or 4 weeks of rest.
Yeah.
Most people aren't going to fly and see another person to double check on that outcome, right? If I tell you you need a massive big surgery, or you need a surgery that's going to cut away half your season or your entire season, you might be like, whoa, I want to get a double another check. You see that all the time.
Yeah.
So, to me, that's a red flag for how bad this is. But again, I'm not in the clubhouse. I don't know what's going on, so I can't actually see the injury itself, but I get a little bit worried when I hear that.
Yeah. By the way, he's already been ruled out for week 1. They had it on the table. He may or may not play, but he's been ruled out already. So we'll see how that kind of goes. And then, we talk about these, and this is kind of why I'm using these guys right here, which I think would have been the offensive rookie of the year, Breece Hall. Tore his ACL meniscus in week 7. One of our favorites, Sterling Shepard, had a very, bad injury himself. When we hear about ACL and meniscus and the type of the injuries that both these players have had, and the fact that they are ready to go week 1 of 2023 season, first off, the type of injury and also the recovery and the work that has to go into it in order for you to get ready to be able to play at this high level for week 1.
So first off, I think the hard part of this is that it's not that it's impressive that they're getting back, but it's what it shows. And, as a surgeon, and I do a lot of ACL injuries, players, my patients, athletes, et cetera, that aren't professional athletes come in and they see this and they say, hey, why can't I get back in 7 months? Why can't I get back in 8 months? These players are doing it. I should be able to do it too. Well, the average return to playing is between 9 to 10 months, and maybe even longer than that. If you look at the data, that's in general on all comers. Now, again, these aren't professional athletes, but I think you get this sort of warped perception of what normal return is. We always talk about the Adrian Peterson ACL, where he came back stronger, had an amazing year, ran for over 2,000 yards, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he's not human.
Everyone talks about that.
He's not human.
No, he's not human. Yeah. I totally get it. We've talked about that before as well. But nonetheless, it's a lot of work. They're doing, like I said before, they're using tons of biotech. They're using rehab tricks that we haven't even heard of. They're flying around to get treatments. They're working 6 days a week, things that we can't do with normal jobs. I mean, their job is to get better and play football. And so they have to do that all the time. They're putting in 5 hours. I mean, you hear their workout regimens is like 5 hours of exercise a day. I mean, we wouldn't be sleeping if we had 5 hours of exercise a day with our jobs. So, at this point, they can do things we can't do in our normal life. So that's why they're able to get back a lot of times. And they're also, they're still fairly young. I mean, these players are still young. They consider them old at 31 years old, So they have young bodies and they're adapted to this. And also these players play through different things. I mean, we have patients that recover from ACLs. They say their knee feels some stiffness at 6 months, or they have a little bit of discomfort. These guys are feeling the same thing, but they don't really care, right? These are players. They're used to getting hit. They're used to getting damaged. They're used to getting beaten up. They play with pain. We could talk about that topic as a whole other section. But, I can tell you, if you ask them 90% of the NFL players on the field if they have any pain, most of them would say yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, now that we know some more information and some of the technology, and we think about Adrian Peterson and how fast he came back from his injury, and he didn't even use an internal brace. I mean, come on now. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. By the way, check out our show on internal brace. It's a great show. I think we mention it every show because it's my favorite. I'm going to perform it. I'm not sure. I'm going to walk in. I got to steal some credentials, and I'm going to work on. Or maybe I shouldn't have shot myself out like that. We'll just move on. Let's wrap up the show. Let's wrap up the show here, and let's get some predictions. Sure to go wrong. Who are you liking to come out of the AFC to be the representative in the Super Bowl for this 2023 into the 24 season?
I'm thinking, I don't know. It's hard to decide. I think the Chiefs, man. I'm still thinking.
You think the Chiefs are still the team to beat?
They just always surprise me.
And they still got Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. So I think they're still the team to beat.
I like it. I'm going to go with a wild card just to be different. I was thinking Jacksonville. I'm going to go with the Ravens. Lamar Jackson, if he can stay healthy. You know, they have a new offensive coordinator. It's something different. And if that happens, that means that, you know, Joe Burrow didn't get through the season unscathed, because that's the same division of the Bengals. So, you know, I hope I'm not putting the kibosh on Joe Burrow. All right, the NFC, who do you like to be the representative in the NFC? There's, you know, there's some interesting teams there.
I don't know. I mean, I think the Eagles are still so strong, but I mean, it's not a very strong division right now with
I agree.
A lot of the teams.
Yeah, the conference is not that good. Yeah.
I don't think the Giants are going to be close. No, I think the Giants are going to be close behind. I mean, if they don't get injured, if Darren Waller stays healthy, the Giants will be close back.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think the Eagles are just head and shoulders above everyone else. But to be different, I'm sorry, Seahawks fans. I'm going to go with the 49ers to represent. I think if the 49ers could get the Eagles with a healthy quarterback, they just gave Nick Bosa about $1 billion with his new 5-year contract. I'm pretty sure they're going to be like, hey, you know, remember last year when you whooped on us when we had no quarterback playing? Revenge is sweet. So I would love that. That would be ideal. I would love to see that matchup to send one of those teams into the Super Bowl. So that would be fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are our predictions surely to go wrong. Let's wrap it up as we always do. I like to bust your chops, so we're going to have a little trivia. We're going to send it right down your lane as a Giants fan. By the way, the Giants have been around since 1925, so in 2 seasons, it would be 100 years. They're one of 5 teams when they first started the NFL, and I don't even think it was called the NFL at the time, but when they started the Football League. So Saquon Barkley is 5th on the rushing list with 4,249 yards. If he stays healthy and gets another 1,000 yards, he's going to pass Joe Morris and be in that 3rd spot. Can you name the running back that has the franchise's rushing record?
Is it Tiki Barber?
Tiki Barber has 10,449 yards and maybe one day will be in the Hall of Fame. That is the correct answer. Tiki Barber.
I never get those. This is awesome.
Number 21 in your program, ladies and gentlemen. This has been great. It's a great show. This is always a lot of fun. It's always good to talk some sports and talk a little tech and talk urinal sensors. So that really made my day. So just want to remind everybody, check us out, sportsdoctalk.com. We're talking sports, we're talking orthopedics, and we're talking all the time, obviously, because I'm still rambling on. I'm Will Sanchez, Dr. Grant Garcia. Dr. Garcia, thank you so much for your time. Any last thoughts as we wrap up the show?
Well, first off, thanks again for this show. Is always fun, and I'm glad that we talked about all those various topics, and I think the listeners will enjoy it. And we want to mix it up a little bit. We've had a lot of guests on recently, and we're going to have some guests in the future. I think we're going to start hitting on maybe some of these non-surgical options like rehab. We have some great rehab facilities that we work with that I'm sure you'll love to hear about their cutting-edge technology they're using. And then we're going to have a great episode coming up, which I'm really excited about. And so stay tuned for it in the next few months. It's going to be sort of things we predicted in terms of new surgeries that we were doing and how we're pushing the envelope even more and how our previous sort of new tech that's now old tech is doing. And so it'll be really interesting to talk about some things. And if Will's lucky, I'll even add some more internal brace stuff for him.
Oh, baby. Woo! Sweet music to my ears. Don't tease me like that. Well, I'm getting excited. It's kickoff time. Dr. Garcia, thank you so much for your time. You have a great evening. We'd like to thank everyone out there, the listeners. We love you guys. Please check out our website. Feel free to email us. We love to hear some of the topics that you want to get some more information or just hear us ramble on. So, but listen, we cannot do a whole show on urinals, so please stay away from that. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Garcia.
Have a good night, guys. Thank you, Will.
Bye.